if you look at public education, one of the things you're struck by, I was struck by this 44 years ago, and I'm still struck by it today, when the numbers are much bigger, that you're dealing with a very major enterprise when you deal with Texas public education. We have 4.7 million students. That's scheduled to go up to 6 million by 2030, according to the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education projections. That would still make us second to California, but if California keeps on going the way it is, I expect that they may change their projections. We have 328,000 teachers. We have over 600,000 total staff in the system. That's also going to grow. In terms of districts, we still are operating with, as we have been for most of the period that I've been here, with a substantial number of districts. Today we have about 1,200 districts. About 1,000 of those can levy property taxes. About 200 of them are charter schools that operate as well. The system spends approximately $50 billion. That's when you look at the total, that's over $10,000 a student when you take into account everything that we spend money on. And in terms of debt, the school districts of the state have over $50 billion in outstanding voter-approved debt, and it's going up by about $5 billion a year. So whatever this system is, one of the things that you'll find legislatively that tends to happen is that a legislator understands a particular problem in a particular setting. They understand that we ought to do something for children who have a particular problem. Sometimes they don't remember how big this system is when they're trying to cure that one small problem, and they tend to overreact as a result. Just a little bit about history of where we've been in public education. In the 60s when I started, the state was still recovering from segregation. The school finance formulas were literally written separate, that we had separate school finance formulas for white and black schools operating at the time. We did have a very progressive textbook system that had been enacted earlier to make sure to provide free textbooks throughout the state. We did have the beginnings of accountability in terms of state regulation of an accreditation system. In terms of going into the 60s, the one thing that came out of the 60s more than anything else was that we rejected the consolidation option. The study that I worked for in 1969 advocated going to 350 school districts in the state, one per county maximum, until you had 2,600 students. Presented a major plan to the legislature, went absolutely nowhere. One of my jobs back in those days, among other things, in terms of working on school finance, was occasionally to go pick up the mail. I guarantee you, we had to have pickup trucks to pick up the mail after we advocated consolidation of schools. But we are still dominated in Texas by a very large number of very small schools. If you take that 1,000 districts that I talked about a little while ago, it only takes about 90 of them to account for 2/3 of the students in the state. The other third are in the other 900 school districts across the state. We have many, many districts with less than 500 students. And it becomes very difficult to consider this a system when you're trying to pass a law that affects Houston ISD with 200,000 students and North Zulch ISD. I hope nobody's from North Zulch, but from North Zulch with 100 or so. In the 70s, at the end of the 60s, we had we also had, it's not on here, but we also had the beginning of the issue of the Rodriguez decision. The Rodriguez decision was a federal court decision in 1971 that basically said that the school finance system of Texas was chaotic and probably unjust, but it wasn't unconstitutional. and that is it essentially took the court took the position that that it was not the financing of public education was not directed by the provisions of the U.S. Constitution by a 5-4 vote, and that ended the federal court option. There had been a great deal of litigation in the 60s and early 70s nationwide to try to use the federal courts to try to address school finance inequity. That ended that, and it ended in Texas for some time. Also in the 70s, we had to recognize inflation. We had to recognize increasing teacher pay. We began to get some recognition in the 70s of urban education issues. In the 80s, the 80s were dominated by a commission that was headed by Ross Perot. If you remember back in the beginning of this, and I talked about words in the Constitution, and it said system. Well, to tell Ross Perot there was a system was like throwing raw meat out. And Mr. Perot decided that, by God, we should have a system. So he helped pass laws that did a great many things in terms of bringing systemic reforms to public education, of providing finance, curriculum, minimum staffing, quality. This is when 22-to-1, the class size limitation for elementary education was passed. A substantial increase in accreditation was all passed at that time. In the 1990s, we had the Edgewood litigation. That was 4 different separate lawsuits over a period of about 5 years that had a substantial impact on the financing of public education and ended an historic discrimination against low property wealth districts, at least to some extent. I noticed you had Scott McCowan on your pictures earlier. Judge McCowan and I got to know each other when I was on a witness chair and he was a judge. It's not a fun experience, if you, to tell you the truth, to be on the witness chair with McCowan as judge, because he lets the lawyers ask questions occasionally, but does a hell of a job himself. And since the 1990s, we've had we've had more accountability, and I'll come back on that in a little bit. We've kind of increased state regulation. We had a new round of school finance litigation called the West Orange Cove litigation that led ultimately to property tax reduction. In terms of national comparisons, let me skip to the next slide. There's a National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, and actually, in contrast to some other issues like expenditures per pupil and average teacher salaries, we show up somewhat better. In grade 4 mathematics, we actually have a score right about equal to the U.S. average in grade 4 and a little better than the U.S. average in grade 8. Reading, again, right on the national average for reading comparisons. There's a publication called Quality Counts that is put out by Education Week, and I won't go through all the detail of it, but as you can see, Texas again does in a number of places not a whole lot worse than the state in terms of the chance for student success given a grade of C, ranking 39th, but compared to the average state score of C+. In standards, assessment, and accountability, given a grade of A, ranks 6th in the country and with an average score of B. From there it goes a little more downhill. In terms of the status of the teaching profession, a C, right on the national average. In terms of school finance, and I might argue with how they calculated this, but they have a D plus that is somewhat lower than the national average. Transitions and alignment of programs, a B, and K-12 achievement levels, a C, but compared to a D plus for the average state, and ranking 13th in the country.